Alright guys, Bill here back with a new video, and in this video, I'm back with another video talking about Jeff Probst, which I surprisingly haven't done in a bit at this point. However, in the past I've done videos predicting his winner rankings and season rankings, though here I'll be getting around to predicting his cast rankings, where this will be a list based on how I think Jeff Probst would rank every cast in the history of Survivor US. Now again, this is going to be based on what I think Jeff's criteria would be, which would mostly be memorability / how iconic they are. And honestly, just like those other lists, it is kind of difficult to still fully piece these lists together, where there's a decent chunk of seasons that we haven't heard Jeff Probst talk about in years at this point. But again, gonna do my best based on interviews that I've seen from him over the years. And again, the kind of basis of this list as well will also be not just who Jeff would spout out as his favorite casts, but more so if we were to actually sit Jeff Probst down and force him to actually rank every Survivor cast, what would his ranking be? Which I do think is a bit different in the sense that I do think there would be a lot more recency bias with just outright asking him the question over going through this method instead. But either way, let's start running through the list itself. Starting it off at number 44, the cast Survivor I think Jeff Probst likes the least is pretty easy to note here, and that is Survivor Thailand. And Survivor Thailand's been one that Jeff Probst has always continuously talked about how he doesn't like Survivor Thailand and talks about it having a pretty unlikable cast. It obviously has Brian Heidik, who is someone that he's very notably not liked in Survivor history. He never liked Clay. I mean, he continuously talked about how disappointed he was that Jan, Ted, and Helen didn't flip on Brian at the final 5. He obviously got annoyed at the Sukjais during the Attack Zone Challenge, and really just in general, I don't think there's a single person from this cast that he actually genuinely liked. Again, I think there are people that he was like fine with people like a Ken or people like a Sheehan, but as a whole, Jeff just clearly did not like this season, mainly because of its cast, and because that I did land it here at 44. At 43, moving on to a cast that I think is another one that Jeff would call mostly boring, and one that I think he just largely doesn't remember anymore, and that is Survivor Guatemala. And again, just looking at the Guatemala cast, I don't know if Jeff can even name half these people at this point. I don't think he knows who most of these people are anymore. And while he's always liked Danny Boatwright as a winner, and obviously he still likes Stephanie, I really don't feel like most of his cast stands the test of time for him. Or again, is he really remembering Brandon or Blake Towsley or a Brooke or Brianna or Morgan? Like, I very much doubt it. And also, he did openly dislike Lydia at the time, and in general, this was another one of his seasons that he didn't particularly love. So again, I felt like 43 felt like a decent spot for it. At 42, another cast that he's openly called boring, and that is Survivor Fiji. And again, Survivor Fiji is another one. He liked Yao-Man. He liked the drama that came from Yao-Man and Dreams, but outside that, he clearly just did not like this season. Now, I will say in the modern day, obviously Earl Cole has been someone that has been in the casting pool recently to where maybe there's been an uptick in his interest in Earl Cole. However, he even said at the time of Here's His Villains that Earl Cole was a boring winner. And I think just in general, he did not love Earl at the time. And really just in general, again, like, I don't think he likes the majority of this cast. He obviously very much hates Lacey. He actually kind of liked Jessica DeBen for what that's worth. But again, as a whole, I just don't think he liked this cast either. But I do think Yao-Man is probably like a bigger character in his mind than most of the people from the previous 2 seasons. So again, that's why I put Fiji here at 42. At 41, we have a cast that is also another one that notoriously Jeff Probst hated, this literally being the cause of the change in casting in Survivor at the time, and that is Survivor One World. And again, Jeff has clearly talked about how much he hated One World's casting at the time. However, the reason why it's higher than some of the seasons we've already talked about is because I feel like at least there are people that he remembers from One World. Or again, despite the fact that he didn't love One World's cast, and again, he credits how terrible the casting of this season was to why they changed the casting style for Philippines to include more fans of the game, he still did really like Kim Spradlin. He still really loved Troyzan at the time. Again, Sabrina and Chelsea have been in the casting pool for a while now, a potential returnees. Pat Ederson is someone that I think he enjoyed at the time. So again, I feel like there are these people that he would definitely remember from this season more than the last seasons we've talked about. And while obviously he does really dislike Colton, I don't know if it's enough to really disparage the entire cast, when again, I do think there are some people that he does like here. So again, that's why it's here at number 41. Now at number 40, moving on to another season they also clearly did not love, and that is Survivor Nicaragua. And Nicaragua, I think, is another one that, again, has some people that Jeff kind of likes. He does like Fabio. I do think he liked Jane at the time. I think he liked Marty and Brenda at the time. He obviously loved that Jimmy Johnson was on the show. I think he was fine with someone like a Holly. And obviously, I think now he's happy that Chase Rice was on the show. However, I think just in general, it's not like one of these casts I don't think he remembers the majority of the people from. And really, along with that, he obviously was not happy with what happened with Purple Kelly and Nyanka, and then also openly dislikes Shannon Elkins. So again, I think this is probably a cast. I think there's probably more people I can note that he kind of likes, though there's also probably just more people that he hates. So kind of evens itself out well enough here to be at 40. Now, number 39, another cast that Jeff clearly did not like at the time, and that is Survivor Gabon. And again, Gabon's one of these seasons that I don't think Jeff has ever loved, and looking at the cast of this season, I don't think there's that many standouts of people that Jeff actually liked. Like, I think there's a few people that he's like fine with. Again, he liked Randy at the time. He thought Sugar was great at the time. I think he was fine with both Maddie and Kenny. I think he likes to talk about Bob as the oldest winner, and I think that's enough for him to kind of like Bob. But really, everyone else, I just don't think he particularly liked. I think he particularly didn't like Susie at the time. He seems to just really be ambivalent to the rest of the cast. And I think it's another one of these casts that I just don't think he remembers the majority of it anymore. And really, just in general, again, like I think there's a few people that I could say he likes, but I don't think any of them really stand up as Jeff Probst's like favorite characters of all time. And really, it's a cast I just don't think he ever particularly loved, and it's here at 39. Now, number 38, moving on to a cast I think has one specific person that he loved at the time. And while there's maybe a couple other people to know, it's really a bare bones cast from Jeff's point of view, and that is Survivor Samoa. And obviously, again, at the time, he loved Russell Hantz. I think there's no denying to that. And I think along with that, he did really like Shambo. However, beyond those two, again, it is a pretty lackluster cast from Jeff's perspective. I feel like the only other person that you can kind of note here, again, there's a couple other people here that I think he kind of likes, in a Laura Moret, a Russell Swan. But I think it's another one of these casts I just don't think he remembers the majority of them. He obviously did not love Natalie's win at the time. I feel like Mick is the type of person that he just simply doesn't like that much. He didn't particularly like John Fincher. And really, again, I just don't feel like he can name like half this cast at this point. So again, it ends up being lower on the list here at 38. Now, number 37, moving on to kind of a series of older school casts here. Casts that, again, I just don't feel like he knows the majority of these people anymore. But at 37, we're starting off that tier with Survivor Vanuatu, which, again, I think there are definitely people that he kind of likes. Obviously, Julie Berry, he loved at the time, like kind of literally. I think he likes Amy and Eliza as characters. He loved Twyla at the time. I think he's grown respect for Chris, even though he didn't like him at the time. I think by the time he hears his villains, he talked fondly of him, and I think just in general, he's probably higher on him now. But again, I think it's just another one of these casts. I don't think he can name really the majority of the people that were viewed pre-merge. I'll be shocked if he could name more than two. And he never really seemed to be a major fan of someone like a Rory or a Chad or any of these other figures on the season. So again, I think he's just one that isn't super notable to him, and I don't think there's really this all-time great character on the board that he really adores, and because that's here at number 37. Number 36, kind of a step above Vanuatu, and that is Survivor the Amazon. Now, I did very much debate with the Amazon, as I do feel like this is a season that Jeff does remember fondly. I think he remembers it for its comical tone. I think that could taint his opinion on its cast. However, I do feel like just in general, again, like, does he know most of these people anymore? Like, obviously he remembers Rob Cesternino. I think he remembers Jenna. Like, I think he remembers Heidi. But really outside that, like, does he really remember anyone else? Like, again, there's people that he openly disliked, like someone like a Butch. On the On Fire podcast recently, he couldn't even remember Matthew's name. And again, like, is he really remembering the likes of a Joanna, a Janet, a Jean, Ryan Aiken, a Dave? Like, I really just don't feel like that's the case. And while I think Rob kind of sticks out to him as an all-time great character, I feel like the rest of the cast just doesn't, because I left it here at 36. Now, number 35, moving on to another older school cast, and that ends up coming from Survivor Africa. And again, this one was a bit tougher to me, because I do think he still remembers the big three here. I think he remembers Lex, Tom, and Ethan. He always really liked Ethan. However, again, I think it's another one of these situations where, like, yes, he remembers that grouping, but does he remember the rest of the cast? And I really just don't think he does. I doubt he remembers the likes of a Linda Spencer, a Carl, Jesse Camacho. And while, again, there are some people people here that he kind of likes, like Kelly Goldsmith, T-Bird. I feel like it's another one of these like mostly unnotable casts to him outside of the likes of Ethan, Tom, and Lex, which are what keep it above the last few seasons, being here at 35. Now at 34, a cast that I actually debate putting lower on this list, considering I do feel like this is a cast that, well, like there are definitely higher highs on this cast than the last few casts we talked about. I think there's also probably a lower average as a whole on his notability of this cast, though also this season as a whole is kind of tainted for him to a degree, and that ends up being Survivor Marquesas. Now, the reason I did put it above Africa is because it does include the likes of a Kathy, someone he really liked at the time. Gina Cruz is someone that he's very notably really liked. However, obviously, it is also the first appearance of Boston Rob, and I do think that is something that really elevates this as well, as I think that is what he remembers Survivor Marquesas for in the modern day. However, again, like when looking at the rest of this cast, I don't think he remembers a decent chunk of this cast. And does he remember Patricia? I don't even know if he remembers Peter Harkey, Sarah Jones, Gabe, Zoe. I feel like just so much of this cast is not super memorable to him, and obviously he's never particularly like Vesepia. I don't think he ever loved Sean that much. I don't think he particularly liked John Carroll or Nalia. So again, it's a very mixed bag of a season, but the reason I put it higher than the last few you talked about is because Boston Rob's on it, so I felt like that was good enough to put it here at 34. Now 33, moving on to a cast that I think is another one of these in the ballpark of the Amazon, where I think if he initially thinks about it, he might put it relatively high. But I think when he really thinks about it, I don't think it would end up being that high, and that is Survivor China. And really the thing with China is, again, I think it's another one of these casts from Probst's perspective to where there are these notable figures here and there, but it's overall not a super consistent one for him. Where I think he remembers obviously James very well. I think he remembers Amanda, probably Courtney. I know he liked Todd at the time, but I feel like the rest of the cast to him is just not super notable anymore. And does he remember the likes of a Frosty? I doubt he has positive things to say about John Robert. I don't think he remembers a Sharia or a Leslie or even a Dave Cruiser. Like, I feel like a lot of these people are people that he just doesn't remember anymore either. And even though, again, like Amanda and James are definitely bigger names, I doubt it's enough to put it super high on this list, and that is why it's here at number 33. At number 32, moving on to a similar style of cast, the one that I think has a couple more top-of-mind characters for him in the modern day, and that is Survivor Panama. And again, kind of like the Amanda and James of it all, I think this cast does have Suri and Terry. Suri, who is someone that is very top of mind for Jeff, someone that he constantly mentions in modern interviews, while also Terry, I feel like, is someone that, while his talk of Terry has kind of faded off recently, I do feel like it's still a person that gets mentioned every so often. I think he does obviously remember him for the charitable cause that they donated money to, so I feel like those two are very top of mind. However, really outside that, again, it's another one of these that isn't super notable. I think he has mixed opinions about Shane Powers, where I think he recognizes that he's good TV, though also probably doesn't particularly like him as a person. Aris is someone that he openly talks about as being a boring winner. And Danielle DeLorenzo, I think, is also another one that he's kind of have conflicting opinions on, mostly negative. So again, it's kind of a mixed bag here. I think between this and China, I decided to go with this one, particularly for Suri, where I think just Suri is like an all-time great casting choice in his head. Because that, I put it here at 32. Number 31, moving on to a cast that I could debate putting lower, but I think there are a couple all-time great characters on here for him, and that is Survivor South Pacific. Now again, it's another one of these casts. I think almost everyone booed pre-merge. I just don't know if he remembers them anymore. Even the likes of Christine and Stacy, who are online favorites, I just don't think he remembers them. Though, I mean, when we're looking deeper into the game, he obviously loves Coach. He obviously loves Ozzy. He also really liked Jim Rice at the time, and obviously he loves Cochran. So again, that's a decent amount of people that he really likes on this cast. And again, from a modern day perspective, I think he likes Sophie as well, even though at the time I think it was a bit more of a question mark. But again, I think there's like a decent amount of like massive standouts here to where while there are definitely some people that he just simply doesn't remember, I think the bigger names here really elevate this one to be here at number 31. Now number 30, moving on to a cast that he very openly disliked at the time. However, I think it's one that ages better over time and that cast is Survivor San Juan del Sur. Now again, if I made this list immediately after a season, I think this would have been clearly towards the bottom of the list. However, I think as time goes on, I am elevating this a bit considering the legacies of Jeremy and Wentworth, obviously two of the most popular players in Survivor history now, and two players that Jeff Probst very openly loves, to where I think that definitely elevates his opinion on this season. I think he also really likes Natalie Anderson, especially now, even more so than when the season occurred, liking her even more from Winners at War. And there's a couple other people that, again, I think he likes to a degree. I think he likes Keith Nail. I think he likes Josh and Reed. So yeah, I think just in general, there's a decent amount of people he likes here. Now at the same time, I think there are a couple people that he would consider duds on the cast, people like an Alec and a Wes. I don't think he particularly like Missy or Baylor. So again, I think it's a cast that is a bit more of a mixed bag, though one I think gets more positive over time due to Jeremy and Wentworth, and because that is here number 30. Now our 29, moving on to a cast that Jeff really liked at the time, though I think that opinion has gone down over time, especially after seeing the reception to the season, though I still think it's one that he does like for the most part, and that is Redemption Island. And again, like, this is one that obviously is weighted up massively by Boston Rob. Obviously, he loves Boston Rob on this season. There's no denying in that. He also really loves Philip on this season. I think there's no denying that. And beyond that, he obviously loves Andrea in the modern day, and I think that kind of elevates this cast a bit. He really likes Matt Elrod and has always been wanting him to play again, though that's never happened. But yeah, I think he likes his story overall. I think he still liked Russell at the time, though probably obviously not as much as he did during seasons 19 or 20. Now, I will say though, he didn't love the Zapateras at the time, so that's definitely something to note here. I think from a modern day perspective, again, he's probably not super high on the cast as a whole, though I do think considering his love of it at the time, and also again still loving Boston Rob and Philip and Andrea, I feel like it was enough to land it here at number 29. Now 28, moving on to a cast. I think this is another one of those that I think that he would instantly think that he likes. The one actually getting around to ranking it, it wouldn't be super high, and that is Survivor Philippines, which I do think has a couple people that he really likes. He really likes Malcolm. He really likes Lisa. RC has always been a favorite earlier boot of his. He obviously loves Penner. I think he's fine with Denise. I think he likes Scoopin' at the time, at least. I think he recognizes the good TV that Abby ended up bringing. He liked Jeff Kent. Like, I feel like there's a decent chunk of people here that he does really like. However, I feel like there's also people here that he doesn't like as much. People like a Katie, a Dawson, I think in retrospect he probably doesn't love. Angie, he did get annoyed at points. He was disappointed by Carter. So again, it's kind of a mixed bag of a cast, though again, I feel like there's so many people that I can name that he does like. That does elevate it a bit, but I think as a whole, if you were to truly analyze it, I think you would also recognize some of the people he didn't love on it, and because that would be here at 28. Now 27, moving on to a cast, I think this is one of those that is very top heavy. I think there are three major characters on this season that he loves and remembers. Though I think when looking at the rest of the cast, I don't know if he remembers most of the rest of it, and that is Survivor Palau, where obviously he loves Tom Westman, one of his favorite winners. He loves Stephanie, another one of his all-time favorite players, and he really likes Ian, probably one of his favorite one-time players. One of these players that he's always been wanting to have back on the show. However, when looking beyond that, again, it's a cast that I don't think he particularly loves. Not that he necessarily dislikes a lot of the rest of the cast. I think it's just a cast that he just simply doesn't remember anymore. But yeah, I think it is those three other major characters, three of these like all-time great characters in his mind that would elevate this relatively high here to be here at number 27. Number 26, moving on to another one of these casts that similarly to how I think he probably thinks of Redemption Island, I think is another one of these that he really loved at the time, and that is Survivor Caramoan. And Caramoan, obviously he loves Cochran. There's no denying that. He still really likes Malcolm. He likes Philip. He still really likes Andrea. So again, those are the big names here. I think outside that, he kind of likes Brenda and Dawn, though I think Brenda in particular probably disappointed him across this season. But I think really the thing that sets this one lower on the list for me is the fans, where I just don't really feel like he remembers the majority of this fan tribe. And if he does, I don't think he remembers them fondly. Or even the likes of Reynolds, who's probably the biggest character of the fans, I never got the sense that he particularly liked him. And really, I think at this point, he would fully recognize the fact that the favorites were just outright better cast choices than the fans, and also express regret over the casting of someone like a Brandon Hance, to where, again, it's kind of a mixed bag of a season, but I think there are things he likes from it that landed here at 26. Number 25, moving on to a cast that I think he liked at the time, though it's still a season I never got the sense that he loved it at the time, and that is the cast of Survivor Go Wrong. Now, I think a lot of the people that make it far in the season he does like. He obviously really likes Aubrey, he really likes Ty, he really likes Sydney. Now, he was not a fan of Michelle at the time, though I think at this point he's kind of fine with her, but also he likes characters like a Debbie, he liked Anna Kate at the time, though again, I still think it's a cast that in the modern day, I just don't know if it's the most memorable cast to him. We're outside those major hitters there, and Ty, Aubrey, Sydney, I think this cast is one that's kind of on a lower tier for him, and because that ends up being here at 25. Now, number 24, moving on to a cast that I never fully understood exactly how he felt about this cast, outside of obviously a few members that he very clearly likes, though I feel like this is a cast that seemed to be put together from some issues in casting, but ends up being the cast of Survivor Edge of Extinction, which, again, like this is a cast that obviously very much likes Rick Devens. He obviously likes the returning players on this season, each of which being personal favorites of his, and Wentworth, David, Joe, and Aubrey. I think he does like Reem and constantly talks about her story on the Edge. Though really outside that, I feel like this is a cast that is probably one of the least notable to him of the modern seasons. Like I very much doubt that he remembers the likes of a Gavin or a Julie or a Victoria or a Lauren that fondly. Chris Underwood, I feel like he remembers more so because he won from the Edge more so than him actually liking Chris as a personality. I don't think he particularly likes someone like a Julia or an Eric, and just in general, again, I think all the modern cast is definitely on the lower pedestal from him, but it's still a pretty modern cast, one that obviously he does have a little bit of recency bias towards, and he obviously still loves those returning players and Rick Devens, which I think is enough to put it here at number 24. Now, number 23, keeping with somewhat modern seasons, which we'll kind of be sticking to for a bit here, but here we're moving on to another pretty top-heavy cast in his mind, and that is Survivor HHH, where I think this is a cast where he really loves the final three. I think he loves Ben, I think he really liked Chrissy, and I think he really liked Ryan at the time. Though beyond that, I do think it's a cast that he's kind of just fine with. Like, I think he liked the likes of Devin Pinto and a Mike well enough. At the time, I do think he liked the likes of Lauren Rimmer and a Joe Mena, though I feel like as time goes on, they're probably not these lasting figures in his mind. But I think this cast also contains one of the few recent players that he actually really doesn't like for non-icky reasons in JP, who is clearly frustrated with on the island. So again, I think it is a pretty mixed bag of a season still. One where, again, the earlier boots, is he really remembering a Simone or Patrick or a Rourke? But I do think he loves Ben, Chrissy, and Ryan, and Lauren Rimmer, and some of these other figures well enough to where it kind of balances it out here at number 23. Number 22, moving on to a cast that I think Jeff has a lot of reverence for, despite there being one massive rotten egg on this cast, and that ends up being Survivor Island of the Idols. And again, I think you could argue this being lower on the list. However, I think that simply wouldn't be that genuine to Jeff, where straight up, I think Jeff loves this cast. I think to him, if you take out Dan Spilo, I think this is an all-time great cast. However, I do think Dan Spilo does knock it down a bit. But again, like I think something else to take into consideration is the fact that this is actually the first cast that Jeff Probst had a direct hand in casting, where this is the first cast that was fully formed after the firing of Lynn Spillman. Where this is one where Jeff got more creative say in who got cast on the show, and through that, I think he does have a lot of reverence for this cast. To where I think Elaine is still one of his all-time favorite characters, and he still does like the likes of Lauren Ashley Beck, a Nora, a Janet. He really liked Missy at the time. Though beyond that, I think it's very tough to really assess how he feels about the rest of this cast, where again, I do feel like he does genuinely like this cast and have reverence for it, though I just don't know how much he remembers, again, the likes of a Molly or even a Jason Linden, a Jack, a Vince, to where, again, I think it's a bit of a mixed bag, though I think he did very clearly like this cast at the time, because that is here at number 22. Now 21, moving on to What Do You Know, another cast from the 30s, and this ends up being the cast of Survivor Ghost Island. Now, straight up, again, this is another one of these casts that Jeff very much liked at the time, where Jeff really hyped up Ghost Island when it was coming up. And very clearly from this cast, he does very much like Wendell. He very much likes Dominic. He very much loves Donathan and was a fan of Kellen and Michael Yerger at the time, even though I think they've kind of faded off over time. Even Laurel, I think he had some level of respect for. But even like some of the people that didn't make for the greatest TV, I think he does still like. I feel like he did like the story of Angela. I think he enjoyed Seabass while out there. I think he liked Libby to a degree. So again, I do feel like there are a decent amount of people he likes here. Even the people that were not the greatest TV, I feel like he enjoyed to some degree, and because that the cast ends up being here number 21. Now, number 20, we're moving on to our first returnee season on the board here. First one for a while, and that cast ends up being Survivor Game Changers. I think really being the only returnee cast that Jeff has openly expressed some disappointment with. To where obviously there's still people here that he loves. Where he still loves Brad Culpepper. He still loves Aubrey and Ty and Cherie. He still loves Andrea. He still loves Zeke. Obviously from earlier on, he still loves Sandra and Tony and Malcolm. But I do think there's a couple people here that he's not particularly fond of nowadays, particularly Varner, obviously. JT, I think, has fallen off of Jeff's radar. Troy Zan, I think, disappointed him on this season. And really just in general, post Game Changers, he openly expressed his disappointment in the season with how he's disappointed at the bigger names going home early, to where I think that also leads to some disappointment on his end with the cast. And I think just in general, this is the cast of an all-star season that I think he is probably the most open with not liking, so because that it is here number 20. Number 19, moving on to another cast involving returnees, the one that I think has some mixed results for him, and that is Survivor Blood vs. Water. Now again, Blood vs. Water I think has some all-time great characters for him. You have Sierra, who he obviously loves. I think he loved Vetus at the time. He obviously still loves Brad Culpepper. Obviously Tyson wins this season, a character that he likes, though I will say I've never gotten the sense from Probst that he's loved Tyson across his Survivor career. I always feel like Tyson's not quite up there in his favorite characters of all time, though still, I think he liked the arc of Monica Culpepper and liked Hayden on this season. So again, I think it's overall a season that has a lot of people that he liked, though I think there's also a decent amount of people he doesn't like. Obviously, Colton is on this season. You can tell he got annoyed at like Laura B at a point. I find it tough to believe that he likes someone like a Rachel that much. I don't think he particularly liked Katie. So again, I still think it's a cast that he's a little bit mixed on, though I think there are probably a good chunk of decent big names here. And considering it's also a mostly returnee season, I came out of this season being extremely high on it. I did end up leaving it here at number 19. Number 18, moving on to a cast that really ends up being part of a series of casts that we're about to be talking about that include some really iconic characters. There are still casts that I think contain a lot of people that Jeff just does not remember. We're starting that off at number 18 with season 18 Survivor Tocantins, where obviously here we do get JT and Steven, obviously one of the biggest duos in Survivor history and one that Jeff clearly loved at the time. Obviously he loved Coach as a character, and also I think he liked Taj. I think he liked Sierra at the time. Obviously Tyson was a big character at the time. Though again, when we're looking beyond that, I think it's just a lot of no names, particularly booted early on, where I don't think he remembers the likes of a Jerry or a Sydney or a Spencer or even a Joe. I just don't feel like these people are super notable to him. But really, I just feel like for introducing Coach to the Survivor lexicon, that's enough to really prop it up in Jeff's mind. And then again, the story of JT and Steven is also pretty high to where, and I end up putting here number 18. Now number 17, moving on to a cast that I've always personally talked about how I think this cast is largely unbalanced, where while there are like 4 or 5 really iconic figures from this cast, it's also a cast of a lot of no names, and I think Jeff would obviously lean more so towards recognizing the legendary figures, though again, if you really sat him down and made him name a lot of these people, I just don't think he could, and that's from Survivor Cook Islands. Again, obviously you got Yule, you got Ozzy, you got Parvati, you got Penner, and you could say Candace as well. I think those are like some pretty big names in Survivor history. Again, he obviously clearly loved Penner. I think he loved Ozzy at the time, and obviously in the modern day he loves Parvati. So again, that's definitely a boon for this season, though again, can he name really any pre-merger outside of Billy Garcia and maybe Cowboy? I kind of doubt it. So again, this is one that's definitely being weighted pretty highly based on its legendary figures, which I think is enough for him to land it here 17. Number 16, kind of a similar case, though I think overall this cast is probably a little bit more memorable than Jeff. But at 16, we do have Survivor Pro Islands, which obviously has the big 3 in my mind of Sandra, Rupert, and Johnny Fairplay. I think those 3 are still in Jeff's mind. Obviously, Sandra and Rupert are 2 of the most iconic figures in the history of the show that constantly get mentioned. But nowadays, well, Johnny Fairplay is one that Jeff has had a pretty hostile relationship over the years, though I think he's grown to not hate Fairplay more so in the modern day, where he talks about Fairplay more positively nowadays. And we're mixing that in the fact that he obviously loves Savage as well, someone that he was friends with for a while after the show. He seemed to like Burton at the time and was really propping him up on the show. So So while he obviously didn't like Austin, which is definitely a major knock for the cast, I do feel like as a whole, he really liked this cast and does contain a lot of legendary figures, which is why it's here 16. Number 15, moving on to a cast that I think is also kind of a similar thing. The one that probably has a more special place in Jeff's heart, and that comes from Survivor Australian Outback, which really just straight up is an iconic cast due to its placement in Survivor history, due to it being at the point where Survivor is the most popular. And I think because of that, for Jeff in particular, I feel like that would play a major role in his placement of the season. However, when looking at the cast itself, I don't feel like it's truly enough to elevate much beyond this point. Obviously, at the time, he loved Colby, though I think that relationship's kind of soured a little bit over time. He liked Tina well enough at the time. He liked Elizabeth and Roger. He probably likes Amber more so than he should for this season. But I think at the end of the day, again, this cast is one that is largely being held up by its overall status in Survivor history. It's here at 15. Now 14. Essentially now we're in the top tier of the list. I think these are casts that Jeff Probst would legitimately call out as some of the better casts in Survivor history. I believe many of these he has called out as some of the best casts in Survivor history. With 14, we're starting off with one that at the time he did explicitly say this is one of his favorite casts. However, I do think this is one of those that I think his opinion has probably gone down over time, and that is Survivor Worlds Apart, where again, like, he really loved this season when it originally aired and really loved this cast. However, I feel like as time goes on, I do not really see Jeff still loving the likes of a Rodney or of a Dan Foley, obviously. But even then, obviously, Will is someone I don't think he particularly loves nowadays, but obviously he still loved Mike Holloway at the time. He loved Carolyn, he loved Shireen, he loved Max Dawson even at the time. Obviously he loves Joe, and again, like, it's just a cast that he loved at the time. He very much propped it up. I don't think it sticks, which is why I pretty much have it at the bottom of this top tier here, but he at least did explicitly mention it at one point that it is one of his favorite casts, so that's why it's here at 14. Now number 13, moving on to a cast that I think the casting of this season really changed Survivor casts for the years to come, making this one of the most important casts in Survivor history, and that is Survivor Cagayan, where I think Cagayan is the point where Jeff in production really realized the strength of casting these bigger fans of the game, these people that are going to play hard, and through that, I think they really did love Cagayan at the time. Mind you, Cagayan was one of these seasons that they kind of underhyped, kind of in a reaction to Jeff kind of overhyping Cara Moen, but it's one that I think at the time of the season itself, I was kind of conflicted on what Jeff actually thought about it. Obviously, in the years since then, it's still mentioned as one of the top seasons, and obviously has a good pool of returnees. I mean, obviously Jeff loves Spencer. I think he loves Cass. I think he loved Tony. He loved Tasha at the time. I think he does still like Wu. And again, I just think as a whole, he does really like these people that did return. But even beyond that, I mean, the likes of LJ and Alexis are these figures that continuously end up being in the casting pool moving forward, where I think he was at least fine with them. I think he recognized the great TV that Shatia and Garrett end up bringing to the show. And just in general, I think it's a cast that he looks at as one of these that change the way that Survivor casts the show moving forward. And because that, I do have it here, number 13. Now, number 12, we're moving on to another one of these casts, kind of similar to Cagayan, that was a cast that he kind of underhyped at the time, though I think it's one that he clearly loves now, and that is the cast of David versus Goliath, where obviously he loves the likes of Angelina and Christian, two of these really massive characters that he remembers from the season. I think he really likes Mike White, not even just as a Survivor presence, but as one that he constantly talks about as one that gives him ideas for the show. I also feel like he liked the likes of a Davey and a Gabby at the time, and Rengering, I think he looked at as a big character at the time. Pat Cusick was someone that he was very high on. And just as a whole, again, I feel like it's a similar cast to how he looks at Survivor Cagayan. However, I did feel like it was the casting of Christian in particular here that made me put it above Cagayan, where I feel like Christian is someone that he constantly mentions in interviews to this day, while I feel like the Cagayan cast isn't as noted anymore in recent interviews. So again, that is kind of why I did end up putting David's Goliath a spot higher here at number 12. Now number 11, we're finally getting to a cast from the new era, which straight up, I do think there would be a heavy bias on casts from the new era on this list, not just because of recency bias, but also in terms of bias of how involved Jeff was with the casting of these shows. As I mentioned, at the time of Survivor IOI, Jeff became a lot more involved in the overall casting of the show, where he got a lot more of the final say on who got on the show. And I do feel like in the new era, I feel like his connection to these players was definitely a lot higher. It obviously had him being a lot more involved in getting to know these people before they got on the show. So again, I do think the new era is going to be heavily weighted on this list, but at 11, we're starting it off with the first of the new era seasons, that being Survivor 41. And 41, I think, is a cast that I think there are some people that he really loves. I think there's also some people that are kind of just fine on this cast to him. I think he really loved Shan at the time. I think he really loved Evie in particular. I think he really liked Xander at the time. I think he did like Ricard. I think he liked the Sean. I think he liked JD as an earlier Boots. But I do feel like out of the new era seasons, this is probably the one that I think he probably remembers the least. I mean, again, like, does he really love the likes of a Genie? Brad is someone that, as much as I like Brad as a character, I never got the sense that Jeff loved the Brad that much. And you got Sarah Wilson, Abraham, Heather. I mean, all these people that I don't feel like Jeff Probst particularly loves. Erica, I think, very clearly was an underwhelming winner in his eyes. And just in general, again, I do feel like 41 is the lesser of these new era cast in his mind, but I still think it is a cast that he largely does like, and he obviously does have a massive connection to it, which is why it's here at number 11. Now, number 10, moving on to another new era season, one that I do think Probst likes, the one that I think he definitely was disappointed with, and that is Survivor 43. And 43 is a cast that, again, I think when you look at it person by person, I think he really likes his cast. I think he loves Jesse, he loves Cody, he loves Carla, I think he really likes Owen, I think he really likes Noelle, I think he even likes Sammy, he liked Ellie, I think he was fine with the likes of like Cassidy, Gabler, Ryan, James. Like, I think he for the most part does like this cast. However, again, the reason it's not higher on the list is because he has openly talked about how disappointed he was in how they played, and talking about how they played was an anomaly, which I think in general does show some disappointment from him. However, again, it's still a cast that is in the new era, one that he does have a large connection to, and one that is extremely recent, which is why it is still here at number 10. Now, number 9, moving on to the last mixed season on the board, this coming from one of his all-time favorite seasons, this being Survivor Micronesia. And Micronesia is a season that I think, obviously, there are these characters he loves. He loves Suri, he loves Parvati, he loves Amanda, he loves the mentioned Eric, he loved James and Ozzy at the time. Penner is on this season, someone he really likes. However, it's still a fans versus favorite season. Through that, again, I do feel like the likes of, again, a Joel, a Mikey B, a Mary, a Chet, are all people that he never particularly loved. I mean, even Alexis, he showed some annoyances with her. Even Natalie Bolton, I never got a sense that Jeff himself particularly loved her. So again, I do feel like he loves some of the people here, particularly the favorites that end up coming back, but I do feel like the fans outside of Eric are people that he didn't particularly love. But it is still a season that he loves, still a cast that he loves. But again, I just feel like in comparison to these more consistent casts moving forward, I did end up leaving it here at number 9. Now, number 8, we're moving on to a cast that would be this high solely because of his reverence for this cast. I think when we're going through it piece by piece, I don't know if it's a cast that really stands up to the ones we'll be talking about in a second, though at number 8, I do have Survivor Borneo. And again, Borneo, I think just in general, is always going to be high. It is a season that obviously he has a lot of nostalgia for, a season that obviously made his career. And I think just in general, Borneo is one that he has a lot of reverence for and will always have a lot of reverence for, and because it will always be relatively high. Now, when looking at the cast itself, it is obviously iconic, but I think there's a lot of figures on this cast. I just don't know where exactly he would go on them anymore. People like a Richard Hatch, people like a Sue, Kelly Wigglesworth, I'm sure he's disappointed with after her return on Cambodia. Don't really know how he feels about a Jervis or a Jenna in the modern day. But again, I don't think it really matters. I think all that really matters is that Survivor Borneo, and I think that's enough to put it here at number 8. Now, number 7, and now we're getting into some newbie casts that he has very openly talked about his love for, declaring these casts some of the best casts in the modern day. We're starting that off at number 7 here, with the earliest of those seasons, that being Survivor Millennials versus Gen X. Which, again, like, he obviously clearly loved this cast. I think he loved how hard this cast came to play, and there are notable figures on this cast that are these all-time great characters for him. People like a David, people like a Zeke. He really liked Jay at the time. I think he likes Adam even now more so than he did at this time of the season. He likes Hannah Shapiro. He liked Michaela, obviously, enough to bring her back the following season. And it is obviously a cast that he does very much like. Though, again, I think it's probably just more so than the sum of its parts. Where, again, there still are people like a Lucy, a Paul Wachter, a Rachel Ako, a Cece, though I think when he thinks of the season, again, he is thinking about the Zekes, the Davids, the Adams, the Hannahs, the Jays, all these people that he does really, really like. So because of that, again, I have him here at number 7. Number 6, getting back into the new era, again, a cast that he very openly loved at the time, and that is Survivor 42. And again, 42 is one of these that, and you could see why he loves this cast. Obviously, he loves Marianne. I think he loves Jonathan for the physicality he brought. I think he liked Drea quite a bit. I'm sure he liked Omer. He liked Mike. I think he liked High. Again, these are some pretty big figures in the new era to him that I think are for sure all-time great characters in his mind. But even beyond that, again, I think he's fine with Romeo. I think he's fine with Lindsay. I'm sure he's fine with someone like a Tori. And just in general, again, it is a new era season, which means he does have these connections to this cast that I think aren't really there of many other casts. And mixing that in again, all these people that I think he very clearly really likes, it is here at number 6. Now number 5. And at number 5, we're actually having the final newbie season on the board, where again, I did end up going with having the top 4 seasons be all returnee seasons, which was a bit of debate in my mind. As again, I think if we're telling Jeff Probst on the spot, name the best cast of all time, I think he might actually go with the season I'm about to talk about. However, again, I feel like that's a bit disingenuous to the overall concept of this list, where I think genuinely, if he were to genuinely answer this question after a lot of thought, I don't think he would go with this season. I think he would put these returning seasons higher in it, these returning seasons that have more of his favorites. But I do think this is by far his favorite newbie cast on the board, and at number 5, I do have Survivor 44. Obviously the latest season on the board, but again, I just feel like he clearly adored this cast. Now, obviously there's going to be recency bias here, and there's obviously this new era bias, but mixing that in, I think he genuinely loves Jam Jam. He genuinely loves Carolyn. He genuinely loves Carson. He genuinely loves Danny. I think he loved Matt and Franny. He loved Lauren's story. And he talked very highly of Heidi. Again, these are all like some pretty massive characters in his mind. And to him, probably these new locked-in picks for a future returnee season, but he also complimented how inspirational this cast was and how hard they played. And again, just in general, he very clearly loved this cast. He very much enjoyed the time he spent out there with them and what they brought to the show, to where, again, I do feel like when looking at the newbie cast on the board, I think this is by far his favorite cast here. And while, again, that might be recency bias, I do feel like it is a pretty undisputed fact at this point. But now number 4, and again, as I said, the top 4 here are all returnee seasons. The question is, what is the order? However, at number 4, I ended up going with Survivor All-Stars. Now, I did debate putting All-Stars lower on this list, as I do feel like there's an argument here that Jeff Probst himself did not enjoy All-Stars at the time. Where even outside of the negativity surrounding the season from a gameplay perspective, there was also a lot of ickiness on this season. And just in general, I don't think Jeff had a fun experience with this season. Again, he talked about how it was hard for him to host a show with all these returning players that had these bigger egos. And also you have these instances like the Sue situation, which I'm sure he did not look at fondly. Though I think when, again, looking at this cast piece by piece, it very clearly is one that Jeff does like most of the people on the board here. Again, obviously he loved the Rob and Amber storyline. He loved the Rupert. He liked numerous figures on this cast. I mean, people like an Ethan. I think he loved Rich at the time, Rob Cesternino at the time, Kathy, Colby. I mean, there's so many people here that are just these truly iconic figures for Survivor history that I think he just genuinely loved. And while, again, I do think his overall sentiment on the season as a whole is pretty negative, I just feel like the overall iconic nature of this cast is enough to land it here number 4. Now, number 3, moving on to another cast that I think Jeff clearly loved at the time. Again, at the time, he was so high on this season. This being another returnee season. At number 3, I do have Survivor Cambodia. And yeah, I think this is one that, as time goes on, I think there are definitely some legendary figures on this cast in his mind. Again, the likes of a Jeremy, Spencer, Wentworth. He still really likes a Sierra, a Joe. I think he liked Fishback's role on this season. I still think he likes Cass. I think he loved Varner at the time. Again, there are a lot of figures here that really stand out. Though, again, in comparison to the top 2 on this list, there's just so many massive legends of the game in those top 2 casts that I think it would be tough to argue this one being higher, even for Jeff Probst himself. So because that, this one's left here at number 3. Now, number 2, and again, the top 2 here are 2 of the biggest returning seasons on the board. However, at number 2, I did go with heroes versus villains. And obviously here, Jeff does love the likes of Parvati and Russell, especially at the time. Obviously, he loves Boston Rob. He loves Coach. He loved JT at the time. Again, all these are like truly iconic, top tier characters in his mind. And I think after this season, he grew respect for Sandra as the only 2-time winner. I can clearly tell that he still loved Tom and Stephanie on this season, was kind of openly rooting for them. And again, really at the end of the day, it's simply a cast filled with legends that Jeff loves as individuals, and I think he recognizes how great TV they made together here. And while again, I think you could argue this would probably be lower on the list if this is purely based on like these casts that would instantly pop to Jeff's mind, as again, I think when listing his favorite cast of all time, I don't know if Heroes vs. Villains is one that instantly comes to his mind, but I think if he were to actually look at the list of players from this season, I think it would be tough for him to deny it being relatively high on the list, and that's why it's here at number 2. Now, number 1, I mean, this one was kind of easy. I do feel like when looking at the board, this is the one that makes the most sense here. Jeff Probst's favorite cast of all time is Survivor Winners at War. And again, like, I just feel like there's no way that this wouldn't be his favorite cast after when actually thinking about it. I mean, like, it contains some of his all-time favorite players just inherently without even considering the winner aspect of it. I mean, you got Boston Rob and Amber back, you got Ethan, you got Parvati, you have Jeremy, you have Kim Spradlin, you have Ben, you have Sandra, you have Tony. I mean, these are all people that he really loved coming into the season, though even through this season, I think he ended up loving what Natalie ended up bringing to the table. I think he really enjoyed what Michelle brought to the table. I still think he enjoyed the likes of Wendell and Yule on this season. I think he ended up liking Adam even more. Again, like, I just think as a whole, this is just definitively the number 1 pick here. So even beyond just him instantly noting its legendary status as a cast filled with winners, I think when you even look at it as individuals, like literally half this cast are some of his all-time favorite characters. And when even adding in these people that his opinions on their legacies went up even more after this season, I just think it's not particularly close that this would be the one that he would declare the best cast of all time. But there we go. I mean, that is my prediction for Jeff Probst's cast ranking. Now, moving forward, I would like to do more similar videos to this. However, I do feel like with this, kind of the easy ones are off the board. I don't know exactly what next Jeff Probst style video I'll end up doing is, though I'm sure I'll do one at some point down the road. But for now, that is the video. Thank you for watching.